Sometimes I forget, but there are people who don't believe in mental illness. And I don't just mean that they don't take mental health seriously. I mean that there are people who think that things like anxiety or depression or ADHD just don't exist. A great trend as of recent shows that mental illness is beginning to lose its social stigma in some parts of the world. A longitudinal study of mental health stigma spanning from 1996 to 2018 found a significant decrease in public stigma towards major depression, for example. But despite this improvement, another 2018 study published through the American Psychological Association looked at over 1,000 U.S. adults' beliefs towards specific mental illnesses, focusing in again on anxiety and depression. It was found that a third of people did not consider anxiety to be a mental illness. I am not one of these people. I want to make it infinitely clear that this video is not an attack on the legitimacy of the existence of mental illnesses, disabilities, or disorders. This video is about social constructs. Pretty much everything is a social construct. If it's an idea and people have a word for it, it might be a social construct. A social construct can be defined as an idea that has been created and accepted by the people in a society. A very uncontroversial example would be constellations. When you look up at the night sky, you see stars, and for one reason or another, you tend to connect the dots. The Big Dipper, Orion, his belt, Canis Major, and Canis Minor. In objective reality, these stars have absolutely nothing to do with each other in most cases. But at one point, a bunch of people came up with and told stories about what these stars mean and how they could be connected. And from there, a new idea was constructed socially by a group of people. We invented the concept of a constellation having meaning. Applied more critically, many of the identity classifications people use to discriminate one individual from another can be considered social constructs. Race, gender, sexuality, and per the dictionary's own example, even ideas like poverty and wealth are social constructs. Now, the neat idea about social constructs is how paradoxical they are. Obviously, race and gender and sexuality and mental illness literally exist, but only insofar as we agree that they do, and only with as much specificity as we agree that they have. They aren't immovable. These things and their meanings change. There was once a time when being an Irish immigrant meant a person wasn't white. In some parts of the world, to this day, being gay is considered a mental illness. I have been formally diagnosed by a certified and licensed mental health professional with a few different mental illnesses or disorders. The first was ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I had to have been 7 or maybe 8 years old. According to the people that knew me, I was pretty wild. I had a lot of energy and zero focus, but until school had really started, it hadn't been a problem. Once I was sat down in a classroom, my mother had to face a pretty difficult choice. Either I never learned to read on time, or she makes me take the pills my pediatrician gave her. From the ages of 7 to 12, I got used to taking Vyvanse, lisdexamfetamine dimesylate. 50 milligrams housed in a grayish-blue capsule that had the texture of plastic, and when I took it, everything slowed down immensely. Every sensation and every feeling was reined in and more manageable. I was too young to notice the shift when I first started taking it, but my family made a crucial mistake that ended up being to my advantage. During summer breaks, following the end of each school year, I would sometimes not have to take my medicine, either because we couldn't afford them or it was too inconvenient to maintain that routine. And in those moments, the world came back to life. I remember one specific moment. After having to get back on my medicine again, I was walking into a Walmart with my mother and trying to explain how it made me feel. I told her that the medicine made the whole world feel like it was in black and white, with no color or saturation. This story isn't actually too uncommon. These medicines had known and documented side effects on mood and appetite, and at around 12 years old, I finally caught on. I wasn't a normal kid. I had taken all these weird extra classes in elementary school, and I had to take this weird pill that made me feel even weirder. When I would ride the bus home from school, I'd be given my own special bin of toys to play with to keep me entertained. Yeah, something was up. I wasn't a normal kid. And oddly enough, my English teachers helped me get to the bottom of it. For one reason or another, the curriculum of my 5th, 6th, and 7th grade language courses focused really hard on research skills and essay writing. So when it came time to research a topic of my own choosing, I chose to research myself. I chose to try and learn about my ADHD. That was a really bad idea. I figured out before long that ADHD was made up by these psychologist people. I found out that my ADHD wasn't like my blonde hair or my blue eyes. It wasn't some irrefutable characteristic of me. It was just a bunch of symptoms that other people didn't like and said were bad for me. I had even heard that maybe having ADHD wasn't a bad thing. Maybe this wasn't a bad characteristic of me. Maybe I wasn't a bad person for being this way. That maybe it was a natural difference people had had for hundreds or maybe even thousands of years. What if it wasn't me that was wrong? What if what was wrong was this messed up world? The consequence of this would spell tragedy for me and everyone that knew me. I am not a psychologist. And I'm not a psychiatrist or neuroscientist or counselor or medical doctor. You should never, ever, ever stop taking your medicine. Especially a medicine you'd been taking for years at a high dosage. And you definitely shouldn't stop it cold turkey so you experience horrifying and nearly psychedelic, painful withdrawal symptoms too. But that is exactly what I did. I was like a Facebook mom with a high school education getting access to basic science information for the first time, and I promptly used it in the most incorrect way. But that's exactly what I did. Without telling my parents, I stopped taking my medicine, and it was hell. I had gotten obsessed with the idea of self-reliance, of not needing to be changed. I thought this medicine was stealing who I was from myself. So each morning, I'd pretend to swallow it and spit it out a few minutes later. My grades fell off of a cliff. I went from a passably average young boy to an academic failure in only a few weeks. I couldn't control myself. I couldn't focus, and everything felt like it was running at 700% speed. Before long, my parents noticed, and I had to come clean. I told them everything, that I hated taking Vyvanse and that it made me feel numb, and that I didn't want to feel like I was messed up or wrong or different. I wanted to just be me. No medicine, no anything. I didn't want to feel like I was ADHD. This led to a lot of fighting about school and my behavior and impulsiveness. I promised again and again that I would figure my ADHD out through sheer force of will, that I'd get my grades up and figure out how to learn without medicine. It took about 2 years, but I actually did eventually figure things out, but not without some compromise. I could not, for the life of me, pass 8th grade algebra. I ended up taking some form of it 3 separate times. I ended up taking some form of algebra 3 separate times because I just could not pass the class. We even got me a tutor, and eventually my mom and I broke, or I broke after she asked me to, and we decided to get me therapy and access to a psychiatrist. I was really resistant to the idea of actual talk therapy. What I wanted was a diagnosis, something that was clearly wrong with me, and I wanted a real label that would help me make sense of what was going on. I wanted to learn how to deal with it myself. So at 14, we got me a counselor who I saw for a few months before making me undergo dozens of hours of testing. And what did we learn? I had depression, generalized anxiety disorder, ADHD, and it might actually have been all along an information processing disorder related to my mathematical skills. Oh, and I also took this test to evaluate this weird thing called Asperger's, which apparently I passed. So, that's a real W on my part. I was really proud of that, but I misunderstood what passing meant at the time. After a round of SSRIs and a single prescription of anxiety meds that I took like 1 pill per every 6 months because I was scared of it, I stopped going to my counselor and psychiatrist, and I said I would handle things by myself. I got off of all of my psychoactive medicines, and from the age of 15 onwards, it wasn't always great, and I didn't get off without some scars, but it's been over a decade, and I'm still here, and I'm still doing my best. Now, that was a lot of talking about myself, but I wanted to set the stage for a bigger discussion. Mental health is what you make of it. Diagnoses, illnesses, disorders, diseases, and disabilities, these things are concepts that people came up with, and at one time mostly for the singular purpose of discriminating and practically abusing people for being different. But in the modern day, these labels are tools. And in my opinion, they are best used between a patient and a professional. Again, I am not a psychologist, but I paid a lot of attention in my psychology and special education classes that I once took. If you look at the Scripture of Psychiatric Diagnosis, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM-5, you'll see that most mental disorders are evaluated symptomatically. When I say that there is no such thing as ADHD, I mean that, like many things, mental illness is a spectrum. Some mental disorders have well-known and factually verified genetic or neurological mechanisms of dysfunction in the same way that type 1 diabetes is a genetic autoimmune disorder affecting specific cellular transmembrane proteins. So too do some mental disorders have really well-known physiological causes. But with or without a specific cause, disorders are still real. Though even the definition of a disorder or a disability can be kind of philosophically contested. Obviously, a person with paralysis below the waist cannot typically walk unsupported. This person has a symptom in the form of immobility and likely uses a wheelchair as their accessibility device to get around. But in a world of perfect and complete support, a real utopia where everyone's needs are met, is this person still disabled? If every building had perfect wheelchair access, if all the normal ADA standards are met and even then some, or even exceeded, if any inconvenience to normal living is overcome either by the person or the support systems around that person, are they still disabled? What does it mean? You see, disorder is actually a pretty specific medical term. The DSM defines mental disorders in this very long and drawn-out context, stating a mental disorder is a syndrome characterized by a clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotion regulation, or behavior that reflects a dysfunction in the psychological, biological, or developmental processes underlying mental functioning. Mental disorders are usually associated with significant distress or disability in social, occupational, or other important activities. An expectable or culturally appropriate response to a common stressor or loss, such as the death of a loved one, is not a mental disorder. Socially deviant behavior, for example, political, religious, or sexual, and conflicts that are primarily between an individual and their local society are not mental disorders, unless the deviance or conflict results from a dysfunction in the individual as described above. The really notable thing here is that a mental disorder exists only insofar as it causes distress as defined in context of how a person functions, but not in a vacuum. Part of diagnosis involves the disruption of a person's life across domains. At home, at work, at school, or in public. Considering that, do I still have ADHD? I mean, I learned everything I needed to. I am adequately successful at work, at home. I flourish socially, and most of the notable aspects of ADHD are no longer meaningfully disruptive to my life and ability to succeed. This is what I mean in considering that there is, in parentheses, no such thing as ADHD. So, what's the quiet part? What am I talking about? A diagnosis is what you make it. It can be a label that lifts you up or chains you down. It can mean absolutely nothing to you or make all the difference in navigating your inner self and finding success in life. People's real lived lives should determine everything. Obviously, licensed professionals know what they're doing, but you and your experiences will always be more than just a label or diagnosis. As I wrap this up, I want to leave off on some areas of interest that came up and might be tied to some of what I've talked about today. The whole idea of medicalism and bioessentialism sound really interesting, and I don't think that an experience should need a medical basis to be considered real, and psychological experiences don't need to have specific neurological bases in order to have the right to exist or be acknowledged. If you'd be interested in me exploring more about bioessentialism or this idea of even transmedicalism next, let me know in the comments. If you like this video, be sure to like it and get subscribed to keep learning all the things you're not supposed to. Keep saying the quiet part loudly, take care of yourself, and have a good day.